Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to introduce our first panel of our 2024 Economics Forum. Our first topic is disrupting agriculture, the future of our biggest sector. We've got three expert panellists joining me up here who have very rich experience across a wide range of areas that we'll be able to draw on during this panel discussion. We'll start with 5 minutes of intro remarks from each of our panellists. Our first panellist will be Lain Jager, Director of Te Puna Whakaarouni. Our second speaker is Professor Harjinder Singh of Massey University. And our third speaker will be McNee, Chief Executive of AgriZeroNZ. After the 5 minutes of intro remarks, we're wide open for discussion. Please remember Matt's comments about Slido. You've got the Slido. If you're online, some of you are viewing the live stream. If you're viewing the live stream, you've got a link on the website. If you're in the room, you've got your scan box there. When you are submitting your questions, if you could please note the session, or in particular the name of the person you would like that question directed at, that would be a big help to our team that's supporting us in making sure these questions come through appropriately. So with that, I'd like to introduce our three expert speakers and start with Lain, if you'd like to make your intro remarks. Thank you.
Kia ora tātou, good morning. I've got 6 ideas in 5 minutes. First idea, we confront global headwinds. It's important to recognise it's a really tough time to be in government. Putting aside the issues specific to to the successive coalition governments, the underlying cause of the malaise is the global environment we are operating in. That's about demographics, climate change, rapid technological change, high debt levels, economic inequality, geopolitical and trade disruption, and increasingly vocal segments of our populations in Western democracies that are reacting to their falling standard of living. Second idea, these headwinds have a New Zealand face. In New Zealand, these global headwinds crystallise into increasingly unaffordable housing for the working class, health and education systems under significant and increasing pressure, concerning levels of youth anxiety and poor educational performance, roading and water management infrastructure requiring very significant investment, and very significant investment required to decarbonise the economy, all against a backdrop of economic fragility and increasing geopolitical tensions globally. The impact of these headwinds impacts our animal spirits, as there is a growing sense that the country is going backwards and the working class are struggling to make ends meet. Third idea, despite these challenges, it is possible to characterise what success looks like. At a high level, we can discern a list of primary must-do economic and environmental objectives. We must maintain economic growth at or above 2% annually. We must maintain export growth. We must reduce gross emissions. We must double renewable electricity supply with supporting transmission. We must continue to increase investment in health and education. Fourth idea. While it's relatively straightforward to characterise high-level objectives, successful implementation will be both challenging and complex. To achieve this will require a complex and intersecting number of secondary objectives, including but not limited to increasing investment in R&D, which Professor Singh will touch on in his remarks today, supporting productivity growth, supporting the growth of new export sectors, decarbonising dairy, reviewing GE regulations, and enabling very significant investment in and development of infrastructure. Fifth idea, A purely neoliberal economic prescription will not suffice. Governments around the world are confronting similar challenges and are responding with the proactive application of industrial policy. Industrial policy in New Zealand has a poor reputation following our experience with the Think Big policies in the 1980s. Despite this, two areas stand out for the application of industrial policy in modern New Zealand. First, to decarbonise, we need to electrify, and this will require doubling renewable electricity production in New Zealand. How this is done is critical. The cost of electricity will be fundamental to our future export competitiveness and standard of living. The application of proactive industrial policy in the energy sector is not radical thinking. It's crucial infrastructure investment that will be the foundation to our future economic and social well-being. Secondly, we need to invest in the continued growth of the food and fibre sector while at the same time decarbonising the sector. For instance, through the methane partnership, which Wayne will touch on shortly. Sixth idea, proactive industrial policy for the food and fibre sector is important as part of the broader transition. This national-led coalition government has an objective to double the value of exports within the next 10 years. This ambitious goal encompasses not only agriculture and forestry, but also services, international education, technology and tourism. This is a laudable objective, but it implies a compound average growth rate of 7.2%, and that will only be achieved if we continue to grow the food and fibre sector, which comprises 80% of merchandise export earnings. The specific challenge is that we are seeing an unprecedented rewiring of global food value chains, with four main drivers being climate change, technology, consumer and market segmentation, and geopolitics. The New Zealand food and fibre sector remains the backbone of the New Zealand economy, and strong strategic actions and investments are required if we are to both decarbonise and to continue to grow this important sector. Thank you.
Thanks, Lain. Harjinder, we'll move straight to you.
Thank you, Kia ora koutou katoa. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this forum. I'm going to touch upon some of the technology disruptions, major disruptions that can have a big impact on the New Zealand primary sector. We know food is foundation of our economy, but is largely dominated by animal protein that comes in the form of meat and dairy that constitutes over 65% of the total food exports. We know that with the growing population means more demand of protein, mainly meat and dairy, but also this demand will be driven by understanding of role of protein in human health. That's all good news for New Zealand in terms of more protein, more exports, and more dairy and meat. But at the same time, we know that the traditional dairy systems, especially animal agriculture, face major challenges, as Lain pointed out: climate change, resources, water, land use, and growing number of consumers concerned about sustainability and animal welfare. In response to these challenges, what's happening globally, we are seeing major disruptive technologies beginning to emerge, so-called alternative protein technology. That means trying to make protein or find protein outside the dairy and meat sector. There are many technologies, such as you have seen yourself, plant-based proteins from different sources, then they are restructured into different kind of burgers and dairy proteins and oat milks and Impossible Burger. That growth is phenomenal, and I think it's about 30% we've seen growth in that space. But even more disruptive, being able to grow meat in a lab, the so-called cultured meats, so cultivating cells from animals and creating meat without the need of animals. And then there's a precision fermentation where microbes can produce milk proteins through genetically modified microorganisms. Further down the line, a new frontier is plant molecular farming, where actually plants can grow animal protein. So we can actually genetically modify the plants to produce milk, egg, and meat proteins. So this is quite a game-changing technology that are emerging extremely fast. There are many technical barriers to overcome before these become mainstream, probably 30, 40 years away. But over time, the progress is rapid around the world, and there's a massive investment from the private sector, especially in the US and Europe, in those newer technologies. So the challenges would be things like price parity, scaling of facilities, consumer acceptance, regulatory is a big one, environmental regulations, and food regulations around those technologies. So now the question remains, what should New Zealand do? How should we deal with this major trend, technology trend, that's likely to potentially could impact New Zealand agriculture? So we can't just simply wait for this disruption to occur. We need to, I believe that we need to actively participate this in food revolution, potentially developing our own capabilities, skills, international investments, partnerships in this space. So alternative proteins will never completely replace animal foods. I think because the greater demand of protein around the world, they'll never go away. But I think there's an opportunity, so we can be both. So in that case, that will diversify our food exports. So these alternative protein technologies will cater for broader consumer base with different dietary requirements. That actually open up a whole new innovations potentially for the New Zealand sector, side by side, based on high quality, environmentally friendly offerings, both the high-tech traditional foods and these high-tech foods. This will require much more investments into R&D, startups, infrastructure being talked about this morning, and of course this whole ecosystem has to be supported through right kind of policies, regulations to incentivize this sector to coexist with our traditional produce. This is also a unique space for high-value IP development and knowledge development, and that's been talked about quite a lot in the government, the weightless exports. So this is, I think, is a field where a lot happening at the moment. So some of these technologies rely on genetic engineering, and that means we need to carefully look at our regulations on gene editing and GM foods. And without this, we will be left behind in development of these technologies. And that will require consumer acceptance of new technologies and also public education campaigns and so on. So GM technology, of course, will have much wider implication, not just alternative protein sector, but also crop production systems, improved nutrition, better taste, reduced need of pesticides, and so on. So this is a really quite a crucial moment for GM technologies to be looked at again. Another technology that's much more widely coming through is the AI, and artificial intelligence then need to be combined with the new thinking, so we can actually create much more innovative space moving forward to put our industry at the forefront of food exports. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harjinder.
Kia ora koutou, katoa. It's intentional that Lain went wide, Professor Singh went a bit narrow, and I'm going to go a lot narrower again. I'm Wayne McNee. I'm here today in my capacity as the Chief Executive of AgriZeroNZ, and I will focus my introductory remarks on the risks and the opportunities the sector faces in the area of emissions from ruminant animals. However, I am happy to talk across a range of topics given my fairly broad background in the public and private sector and the primary sector. Now, according to the New Zealand Ministry for the Environment, 50% of New Zealand's emissions came from agriculture in 2020. This gives New Zealand a unique challenge and a unique opportunity. AgriZeroNZ is a private-public partnership created under the last government, but as we've heard earlier, will be very popular with this government too, hopefully. We have 7 founding shareholders, 6 from the private sector and the government, who have committed $165 million over 3.5 years to accelerate the development and commercialisation of emissions reductions solutions for farmers. New shareholders are about to join as well to grow the fund, and private sector contributions are amplified by the government dollar-for-dollar match. The founding shareholders are the Crown through MPI, Fonterra, Synlait, Ansco, Silverfern Farms, Ravensdown and Rabobank. Together they have a deep experience across the breadth of the landscape and supply chain in the New Zealand primary sector and access to most of New Zealand's farmers. The purpose of AgriZero is to undertake targeted investments and actions to accelerate the development, commercialisation and deployment of effective and affordable solutions that were used by New Zealand farmers to significantly reduce biogenic methane and nitrous oxide emissions. And we are narrowly focused, just those 2 sets of emissions, not soil carbon, not any of the other things. And I think that does help us in many ways to be very targeted in our thinking. Emissions are a disruptive risk and opportunity for our farmers of sheep, cattle and deer. Many of the customers of our processors have set ambitious targets for Scope 3 emissions. For example, by 2030, Scope 3 emission reduction targets are 30% for Danone, Cargill, General Mills, Coca-Cola and Kraft Heinz. McDonald's has a target of 36% reduction by 2030, Nestle 50% reduction by 2030, Pepsi 40%, Sainsbury's 50% and Tesco's 39% of forest, land and agriculture emissions. So you can see there's a massive customer pull here and they are putting big expectations on our sector, our processors and our farmers to help them meet those targets. And they're real targets. These customers are serious. They're actively targeting reducing emissions and they're making purchasing decisions to help them reach those targets. They're clear that New Zealand farmers start with an advantage. We are a relatively low emitting farming sector at the moment for wool and for meat. However, we won't stay that way as there is a lot of new technology coming in other markets, so we need to be part of that change as well. Now, some farmers would say this is all a lie, that methane emissions are not a problem. And even if they are, we are already very efficient, and so we shouldn't need to change our practices. They argue that using different methodologies, such as GWP star, they shouldn't need to reduce their emissions. Now, I'm not an expert in the science, but regardless of those arguments, governments internationally consider methane from ruminant animals to be a significant issue. Customers also consider it to be a significant issue, and increasingly so do consumers. And aside from the customer risk, there's also a trade risk. If we're not seen to be taking action, we could see non-tariff barriers for some of our products. Alternative plant, we just heard from Professor Singh, alternative plant-based meats and milks are taking up shelf space. And we need to show that we are able to reduce emissions as well. Cell-based, plant-based, etc. are becoming increasingly competitive. So that's the bad news. The good news is, in the area of emissions reduction in ruminant animals is attracting a lot of funding, a lot of international funding from philanthropic funds like the Jeff Bezos Earth Fund, the Gates Foundation, the Grantham Foundation, and private equity investors like Breakthrough Energy and many others. And this investment is starting to pay dividends. There are products in development from low methane genetics to effluent treatments, vaccines, feed additives, nitrification inhibitors, 3-knot probiotics, various seaweeds, and high lipid grasses. And so you might say, why do we need New Zealand investment and involvement? Well, the answer to that is actually simple. Most of the investment to date is for tools for farmers who are using high-intensive, high-feeding systems, be it dairy or meat feedlot systems in Europe, the United States, and China. Things that need to be fed continuously to an animal, which will not work in a New Zealand pastoral system. And New Zealand is a very small market. Although 75% of the world's farmed ruminant animals are pastoral, extensively grazed, mostly in Africa and South America, they're not high-value markets for companies that are developing new technologies. We are focusing our investments on tools that will work in a pastoral farming system, and we seek agreements with the companies we invest in to bring those tools to New Zealand, do the necessary research here, and get regulatory approval, make their products available to farmers. So we're what you would call a strategic investor in these types of companies. So in summary, there is a very real and disruptive risk to our dairy and meat sectors from customers' emission reduction targets. But there is also a very real opportunity to stay among the most efficient producers of dairy products and meat in the world. Kia ora.
Well, I promised you we'd get some rich insights, and we certainly did from the wealth of experience from our speakers here. Of course, their bios are in front of you as well if you want further information about them. We really covered the full spectrum, including some wonderful links with the rest of the sessions that we'll be having through this forum, so we can already start to see these links starting to happen between the sessions, and we covered the full sort of spectrum there, so thank you very much for those intro remarks. I'm going to start with a question that I'll address first to you, Lain, and then I'll ask Wayne a part of it, and then we'll see, Harjinder, if you would like to add something on there as well. Lain, you mentioned that the current national government has this aim of doubling food and fibre exports in the next 10 years, ambitious. Do you think it's achievable? Are there any policy settings that could achieve that? And then, Wayne, I'd like you to comment particularly on, do we want to achieve this, or are the environmental consequences too great? So, Lain.
Okay, so first of all, let me say that from a New Zealand Inc. perspective, a national good perspective, that objective is absolutely appropriate and important for New Zealand because of the headwinds we face. We simply must continue to grow exports to be able to support the standard of living that we all aspire to. It's not an unreasonable objective. If you want to defend it, you say, well, actually, we did that over the last 10 years. We were able to double exports. And so that's, at a headline basis, it doesn't seem that unreasonable. But actually, it's harder. And it's harder because of what's happening in the global environment, although I would just pause to say that the impacts of climate change on food production systems globally actually will probably be quite good for the demand for New Zealand food. It's sort of a dark silver lining, if you want to put it that way. So the demand side looks reasonably strong. The supply side, though, is pretty tough. So when you look at the New Zealand food production system, you're talking about 7 big verticals: dairy, meat, apples, kiwi fruit, etc. When we go and we look at the growth rates being achieved across those 7 big verticals, what we can see is the growth coming off. And so, it is harder for our current sectors to grow. The implication of that is that we need to protect our current sectors. We need to enhance their ability to continue to do well. For instance, through the work that AgriZero is doing and Wayne is leading. And importantly, it is critical that we develop new export sectors in the food and fibre sector. So the blue economy is languishing. It's $600 million, Norway's $18 billion. And so there is a massive opportunity in that space. There's a massive opportunity in the health and wellness space. And that's why this idea of industrial policy is so important, because that growth will not be achieved unless we are absolutely mission-focused, absolutely creating alignment through the system, regulation and investment, and driving forward to continue to grow those new opportunities.
Thanks, Lain, and perhaps we'll come back to picking winners a little bit later. Wayne?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I think it's a great idea, and I would think that because when I was Director General of MPI, we developed a goal to double the value of primary sector exports by 2025, which we put in place in 2012, and actually not too far away from it by 2025 as it happens, so great idea. The challenge is, how do you make it happen given the tools that are available in the sector and to government? And there are some things government can do. It can reduce regulatory barriers. It can incentivise using industrial policy in the right places, but it's about value, not volume. So you come back to the environment piece. I mean, that's kind of the key, isn't it? So we just don't have the space to grow more and more and more of everything. So we need to, and we've been working on this obviously for a long time. trying to look at areas where we can raise that value. And we have been raising the value. Apparently I need a different microphone. Yeah, we have been raising the value of our primary sector products over time, and we just need to continue to do that. But it really needs focused support from government, and in the end it has to be the industry itself that leads it, because it is the people that are growing, the people that are processing, the people that are selling who will actually do it.
Thanks. Harjinder, can I turn to you, but can I sort of add in this issue, you know, what's the current makeup of food and fibre exports, and how do you expect them to change over the next 10 years? In your comments, you talked about a lot of these new technologies, a lot of the new products. How would you see them changing in the next 10 years? And there are things in particular we need to do to invest to support that change?
Yeah, I think obviously it's all driven by population growth. So the population is expected to reach 9.5 billion by 2050. So, and of course, the proportion of growth is going to be largely in Asia and Africa to some extent, and the disposable income rising around the world. So in a sense, the demand for higher quality protein, higher quality food is going up. It is bound to go up, and opportunities for New Zealand are immense. In fact, I may have made the point that the other technologies are there, but the reality is that the growth of animal protein is growing, and it will grow a bit further. But the cake is getting bigger. So it's a question of how we, the other part of the cake might be that there will be more options for diets that are produced differently through the newer technologies. There may be more plant-based. So how we take that opportunity as well. So that comes to the diversification portfolios. So what else we can do in addition to what we are good at. So I think, so I'm not sort of denying the opportunities are immense. The growth is going to be always there. Thank you.
Thanks. Wayne, can we come back to you on this issue of the high margin? You talked about moving up the value chain and so on. How do we balance this targeting of high margin food and exports globally versus being able to supply low cost food locally? That's one of the questions we've got coming through from Slider. How do we balance those two tensions?
Yeah, I'll have a go. That's a tricky one, isn't it? And it's always been a tension. If you get high value for your products when you export them, then you expect to get similar prices for them in New Zealand. And we provide extremely good quality dairy and meat products, and we get good prices for them internationally. And our consumers, as a result, end up paying relatively high prices for products that they think, well, why is this happening, given we grow so much of it here and we do export most of it? Yeah, look, I don't have the answer to that, unfortunately. Like, if you're a company that is selling a product, you want to get the highest possible price for it. But there is a bit of a license to operate for the industry here. And, you know, I know that the dairy industry, for example, and the meat industry have done a lot of providing food like milk in schools and food into food banks and a lot of work like that, and meet the need from the meat industry. There's been a lot of work done to provide food for free to a lower socioeconomic groups. Doesn't really fix the kind of the ticket price that you see at the supermarket. But I do think that there's other ways to add higher value, though. So if we talk about back to the emissions thing that I started with, it's true now that those companies like Nestle are paying a premium for low emission product, and it's small now, but it is growing. So they have started paying a premium to New Zealand for our low emission products, and as long as we can retain that and remain low emission, they will continue to pay more. Meat sector's not quite there yet, although there are firms like Silverfern selling their zero carbon product, and I think we'll increasingly see that. If you want to compete with the sort of products that Professor Singh talked about that are, you know, that come from plant-based, you're going to have to be able to deliver those kind of products.
Thanks. I guess where I'd like to turn to now is one of the questions on government-industry collaboration, which will have some links with what we've just been talking about as well. How can policymakers and the agricultural industry collaborate more effectively to co-create policies that address the challenges and opportunities associated with disrupting traditional agriculture in New Zealand? Maybe we'll start with you, Lain, if you'd like to.
So, first of all, just let me acknowledge the importance of the AgriZero model, which Wayne is leading. that is so important because it is an example of a public-private partnership in action where you've got large organisations in New Zealand partnering with the government, putting in place focused governance, specialist management, and importantly then really creating the potential for investment intensity around a mission to get cut through. There is no reason why that model couldn't be replicated in the forestry sector, in the oceans sector. And so sometimes it's about, hey, let's find what works and really look to take that model and look for other opportunities in that sort of space. When we're talking about new industries, that's more challenging because you have an agency problem. The beautiful thing about the dairy sector is there's a lot of critical mass, there are a lot of active participants, and there is an ability to align capital around it. When we're talking about new industries and emerging sectors, then that capital depth doesn't exist, and then you're going to need more support proportionately from the government. So there is a calibration issue in there. The most important thing is that we are mindful and focused and proactive and brave about this. If we think we can drift into the future with an incrementalist approach and achieve the growth we're talking about, we're out to lunch.
Anything that the other panellists would like to add on that one? I think be bold is a nice lesson on this.
I totally agree with Lain. We cannot be incremental if we decide to see some new opportunities like the aquaculture sort of space you mentioned, and there's many other seaweed, for example. There's quite a few startups coming up as well in that space. So if you don't kind of get into something that is going to be important for future and also open this diversification of our exports within the primary sector, I think we need to get our policies lined up, and the investment problem with infrastructure investments in many cases to start something new is a challenge. That's where private sector and government need to work together, and regulatory obviously is quite a big problem to solve in some cases, such as the genetic modifications I mentioned before.
Yeah, and I'll add, I think being bold is important, and I think gene editing, etc., we do need to have a good conversation around that. There are real opportunities in the sector we're working in for gene-edited technologies to reduce emissions, not necessarily in the animal itself, but in the feeds that you give to the animal. So we do need to be looking at that, and it is an opportunity for us. And we will get left behind because the rest of the world is already moving on this quite rapidly in many areas. It's hard for the public sector to be bold. They need to have ministerial cover. Doesn't always work when you're bold and something goes wrong. So I think ministers need to think carefully about the way they encourage that and then support it, because it won't always go right. If you take risk, you're not always going to get it right. So I think that will be important for the government. If they want to be bold, they're going to have to stand up and support it with their public sector.
You talked about this need for difficult conversations. We've also got these very challenging adoption of new technologies. New Zealand doesn't want to get left behind. What's the role of training? What's the role of personnel development in this? Perhaps I might start with you, Harjinder, since you're based in the university. Lain, you've also got wide experience in HR issues, so I'd be curious about what you have to suggest on the need for a change in the way perhaps we deal with skills in agriculture to make sure that we support this disrupted sector or disruptive sector.
Yeah, in the disruptive sector, I think the key is providing kind of focused activities in terms of R&D. Obviously starts with R&D. In the Research Institute, we have attempted to bring together some of the key areas of expertise to target precision fermentation, for example, and also molecular farming. I think it's going to be critical that we have a skilled workforce in this space. That is the problem. That's always kind of a worry about that when we brought that idea forward, that we may be a bit behind, but if we don't do anything, we'll be even further behind. So at least our future workforce should be trained in some of these technologies. Not everyone would be, but So in the future, we have innovators, we have the environment for startups and collaborations, and that will attract investments for future into New Zealand, of course, but also that way we can expand our international network as well, because that's critically important, so we can train our people in the right way through international partnerships. Absolutely critically important to have a sort of focused R&D activities and innovation activities in that space.
I mean, are there specific bottlenecks? Are there specific areas, Lain? What's...
So, first of all, I should just acknowledge that this is a hugely complex and tough area. It's made much more acute by the demographic challenges we have. The reality is that the average age of New Zealand kiwi fruit farmers is over 60 years old. They have massive capital investment. There are succession issues, and not just succession issues from a monetary perspective, but from a skills and capability perspective. So first of all, absolutely agree with Professor Singh. Investment in R&D, so that the opportunity to add value, high value probably means high technology. And by definition, that means high capability, and that means investment in our universities, investment in our CRIs, investment in bringing our students through. That will be absolutely critical for us, but immigration also will play a part. And that's very confronting for us, but we need a whole lot of labour, including highly skilled labour. And so really thinking about what we're doing on the borders, how we bring capability here, what environment we're creating for investment, FDI, and how that can be reconciled with our needs for sovereignty in the sector, particularly in some of these modern food and fibre value chains. These are deep and very challenging issues. I'm excited about the session on demographics we have later today, because I just think it's so important.
Yeah, and I agree with all of that, and I was going to put immigration in as well as being critical. There's also the point, though, if you train people and you develop them, you then need to pay them adequately so that they stay here, because we lose a lot of talent. People go overseas, and traditionally it's, you go overseas for a few years, as I did, and you come back and you do something different. A lot of people don't come back, so 1 million Kiwis living offshore. We need to train people well. We need to then pay them well enough to retain them. So it's another complex policy issue, how you develop that. But yeah, all of those things.
I may just add that in our experience working at the university post-COVID, it has become increasingly difficult to attract high-quality staff, as well as postgraduate students that you might have experienced in Waikato as well. This has actually had a huge impact on, through the immigration policies we had, actually hadn't helped.
And universities certainly face their own challenges, but it was good to hear the three of you think that we're part of the potential solution as well. I'm going to change tack slightly here and ask a rather more specific question that's come through. How do you see the role of sector finances, the tier one banks and so on, needing to change their approach to agricultural operations in the future? I'm not sure which of you would like to have a go at this one first.
Maybe. Questions.
Yeah, I'll have a go first. I've been talking to quite a lot of banks lately. Yeah, they are changing the way they think around, particularly around sustainability and sustainable loans. In that area, there is a lot of focus from banks. I mean, they're being regulated and required to do it. So, but nevertheless, we are seeing the banking sector think a lot more around the way it finances the sector from that perspective. Banking, I'm no expert in banking. It's pretty straightforward. They largely all do the same thing in the same way. I think some innovation in the banking sector would be helpful. It was mentioned earlier, foreign direct investment. I think we need to be more open than we are to foreign direct investment. It has its challenges as well. You look at the capital infrastructure challenges we have in this country, they're going to have to be part of the answer. I'm not sure I'm really answering the question. I'm no banking expert, but that's kind of my 2 cents worth.
We do have a finance panel coming up a bit later in the forum. Any other comments that...
Oh, I think I should leave it to the finance panel.
Okay, right. Note down that one, Matt. Okay, I've got a very popular question here that I'm going to ask out directly as it's come through. All three speakers talk about GHG from agriculture, but all three fail to consider emissions per kilo of nutritional value. If you talk of a society with an increasing bottom end, surely a litre of bovine milk is going to do 1,000 times more for a child than a litre of oat milk, as one example.
You want to start with you? Emission.
Well, I didn't ignore emissions for the nutritional value because clearly it is important. I did note that all of the customers I talked about have absolute reduction targets in emissions, so they want improved efficiency, but they also want to see net emissions reduce, because if we don't reduce emissions, the world will keep getting hotter. That is the point at the end of the day. But yeah, I mean, clearly our sector produces incredibly good quality protein and fat products from dairy and meat, very high quality food, and some of those other products, in my view, don't at all compete. But nevertheless, consumers are looking for choice and variation, and it depends where you are in the market, doesn't it? If you're talking about for children, then clearly for older adults, there are different drivers. I think we do need to keep selling a story of why what we sell is of very high quality, but our companies do a pretty good job of that. And as was said earlier, the population is growing, so there is opportunity there for us to have our place and others to come in as well. But yes, emissions intensity is certainly part of the story.
And let me ask an associated question. Harjinder, I'll maybe direct this one at you. The negative impact of dairy and meat is widely publicised. What are the impacts of plant-based products? Are they significantly better? And are there other concerns not generally widely talked about? Do you have any comments on this, please?
Yeah,
Harjinder?
there's a considerable debate. So it's not that clear-cut that the emissions from at least some of the plant-based products we see replacing dairy are any better, but it's also it's in a bit of trend. There's a work in progress in some ways to prove, for example, almond milk and walnuts and produced from nut-type milks. There's still a debate, especially with almonds, that does actually, the data actually stacks up in terms of the impact on the environment. In some other cases, it might be easier to justify, but even some of the newer technologies I mentioned, still cellular agriculture, there is no kind of real data available and meaningful data available to prove that they can actually reduce emissions, for example. So especially if you calculate per gram of protein or per nutritive value, it's a work in progress, but at the same time, some of these trends are not just related to sort of milk versus oat milk. It's also related to ethical concerns, animal welfare. So there's a vegan consumers. Their aspirations are somewhat different than compared to more flexitarian approaches, where people are prepared to sort of have a blend of different kind of options, plant-based versus animal-based. So it's a kind of difficult question to answer in that context. I think there's some modeling was done. Elaine, you may know, sort of, you've been part of this kind of discussion in your group. Yeah.
Well, so first of all, the Sustainable Nutrition Institute here in New Zealand, SNI, has done fantastic work in this area. There is a whole bunch of data there and models which are available. So there is a fact base which is available, and actually New Zealand is doing some thought leadership in the space. For us here in New Zealand, there's this tendency to, is meat better than plants or worse than plants? What is the role of dairy in future nutrition? How important is plant-based food and should that grow? How do we decarbonise global food production? All of these are valid questions, and of course there is a nutritional element to those questions. My proposal is that we should focus on what we should do, as opposed to trying to have a debate about what's bad or what we shouldn't do. And because actually, so first of all, the dairy industry in New Zealand, it's strategically important to our country. Let's decarbonise it. let's focus on excellence in nutrient management, and let's continue to support and grow that sector because it's important from a nutrition perspective globally, and it's important from a New Zealand economic perspective. At the same time, let's focus on aquaculture because that does have both an economic potential and a very interesting environmental opportunity. And so, you know, this idea of trying to make meat bad or dairy bad, it's not an interesting way to think about it. And interestingly, it's not how other countries are thinking about it. What countries around the world are doing is they're asking the question, where can we have advantage? How can we optimize environmental outcomes? It's proactive thinking. It's not about deleting things. And so the mindset is really important.
If we add fish into this discussion, if we talk more explicitly about fish protein, do we need more investment in the fish protein area is a question that's come through. Very high value product, potentially different emissions.
I'll come out of my corner and say absolutely. Off the top of my head, I think the last government had an objective to grow aquaculture through $3 billion. It's about 600 million today. That should be 10 billion. And it should be an area of absolute national focus for us, taking into account our water space and our need to grow exports and the carbon footprint of aquaculture and the need for protein globally. We have a huge opportunity in that space, but we will not get there without national focus and alignment and courage.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'll add, we did aquaculture reform when I was back in the Ministry of Fisheries. It's languished ever since, I think. We never really quite got there. It's pretty controversial because do you want to have a salmon farm in front of your beach house is controversial when you get into the areas. But the deep water aquaculture that's being developed now has real promise, and I certainly strongly support the need for more aquaculture. And I chaired the Fisheries Industry Transformation Plan last year, and that's gone now because the government got rid of all the industry transformation plans. But there is real opportunity in the wild caught fishery as well to improve the value of that and reduce environmental impact. And the industry and government actually are pretty well aligned. So I think there's opportunity in that industry too.
Yeah, so it's really across that spectrum, isn't it, of traditional, the new products and the fisheries and so on as well. Okay, we've got another very popular question. This is actually coming from some of our school participants from Scots College. Agriculture, how can we encourage young people to enter research career pathways into alternative protein technologies, as there is little awareness when a traditional farming career appears less desirable to some? So I guess these alternative farming careers, how can we raise awareness of these amongst young people?
I think there are kind of different areas of discipline. Obviously, the agriculture production system, there's certain, obviously, high-tech also, like precision agriculture, indoor farming, so there's exciting stuff on farm and growing food. And some graduates will be very much interested in that newer technologies, on-farm technologies. So that's sort of one area. Then the post-farm, where the food technology, food science comes in. And there we need to look at how we produce more interdisciplinary knowledge. I think that's what probably need to be done across wherever food science is being taught, food technology, how we bring in some more disruptive thinking, multidisciplinary thinking into the training programs for our future graduates. We are doing that in our institute, very much that way, but at a postgraduate level, at a PhD level, where we can get people from different disciplines, from molecular biology, from genetic engineering, from computer science, so they can actually have this blend of different interdisciplinary understanding and knowledge. So I think that's kind of model of interdisciplinary training, focusing on the future food is the area that we can focus on. But traditionally, that need to permeate into undergraduate and also to some extent school type of teaching. So there are kind of programs in place, but more needs to be done in that space.
Yeah. I mean, I guess there's going to be some very exciting opportunities for these young folks from Scots College and our other students who are listening in here with the changes in technology that our panellists have talked about, also artificial intelligence that we've only just touched on briefly, but we're really talking about a landscape that may change quite dramatically from people thinking about going into farming and milking cows. You know, precision agriculture, new technology. Any other thoughts from you, Wayne and Lain, on you know, making sure that we get the right...
Yeah, please. Just one more. Yeah, I always tell my students, this is the most, I've done sort of 40 years in food science, this is the most exciting time to be a food scientist.
But rapidly changing, so we've got to have that forward-looking, and that's why these insights from the panellists. Lain, anything you wanted to comment further on?
Just that science, technology, modern foods, it's a hugely exciting space. So for the young people in the room, I would really encourage you to look at it. I'm pretty sure that demand for skills is going to be strong.
And I guess, you know, we've got a lot of questions coming through about plant protein, alternative plant protein. So this is an area that I guess people are thinking about quite carefully during this panel. So Harjinder, could you provide a little bit of exposition about the current difficulties that this alternative protein production faces? You know, Wayne also talked about the fact New Zealand doesn't want to get left or can't afford to be left behind in this. But what are the current challenges that we really face in moving into some of these newer areas?
Yeah, and the plant protein space itself has developed quite a lot. It's already well developed in some ways. So they're basically what you're looking at, find new sources of protein, now new legumes and pulses, and they've been quite popular, so they become quite mainstream. So the idea there is to find a new way of extracting those protein in a more sustainable way, and then you create products that consumers will like. So simply that. So basically some of your protein intake comes from these newer foods rather than from a traditional food. So the challenge still is that the matching the quality of what people are used to. If you're eating meat, if you're eating a burger versus the plant-based burger, is still not the same. There's a nutritional differences, there are taste differences, texture differences. So companies like Impossible Foods made, worth $2 billion now. It's only came on board, 10 years ago, I think, 10 or 12 years ago. So their solution was, for example, so they took plant protein like anyone else. Then they discovered genetically modified, they can genetically, in a genetically modified microorganism, they can produce leg hemoglobin. That comes from legume, but it's produced in a microbe. And that material tastes like meat. So all they did is take that and mix it with their plant-based burger, and that became Impossible Burger. So it was small, it looked small innovation, but it had changed, it had caught the imagination. So that's the kind of things happening. So the taste matching as well as nutrition matching is the next big challenge, whether these products actually can deliver in terms of health, in terms of nutrition, in terms of expected taste and texture consumer attributes. So that's still, over time, my prediction is that they will become better. The other thing that's going to happen is the blends will come into play. So you've got plant-based, it cannot be, it's already happening. There are companies doing things like they're producing meat protein, myoglobin, through precision fermentation. Then you take the myoglobin, you mix with plant-based meat. So that begins to taste like meat. But it is a vegan. So it got animal protein, but it is a vegan. So that kind of thing is already beginning to happen. So some of the challenges cannot be solved. So these cross-hybrid products are beginning to emerge where animal protein can come from somewhere else.
I think, sorry, I'm watching the timer here, and we're almost out of time, but I can see that there's going to be lots of people grabbing each of our three panellists during the upcoming coffee break and throughout the rest of the day. But I'm going to give them 5 seconds each. They can all see the clock here. What's the single most important takeaway about this disrupting agriculture and the future of agriculture in New Zealand? 5 seconds. Single, Wayne?
Opportunity. There is huge opportunity here for our sector. We are in a very good place now. I just think we can grab hold of, don't focus on the negatives. Look at the things we can do to continue to develop and grow our industry and the value of it. So that's my takeaway.
Harjinder, 5 seconds?
Yeah, this is the most exciting sector, I think, to be part of, the new food revolution, and we should all embrace it.
it's never been more important that we really work together and have courage.
Well, what a wonderful start to our 2024 Economics Forum. Thank you very much for these rich insights that draw on a wealth of experience from our three panellists. Do catch up with them. We've already got these links with the subsequent panels, but for now we say thank you very much to our panellists for the wonderful start to our 2024 forum.